There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They don't announce themselves with thunder or lightning, but with the quiet click of a latch, the soft creak of a floorboard, the subtle shift of air in a silent hallway. These are the moments that stand like doors, left slightly ajar, inviting you to cross a threshold you never knew was there. You can stand before them for what feels like an eternity, caught in the breathless space between the life you have and the one you might have if you are brave enough or foolish enough to just push the door open. For me, that moment was a Tuesday night in late October, and the door was Julian's. It was a simple, cheap, hollow-core door, painted an unremarkable shade of white, but in the dim light of our shared apartment hallway, it held all the gravity of a vault. It was open just a crack, a sliver of darkness promising a world of warmth inside, and my entire universe had shrunk to the simple, agonizing calculus of whether to step forward or turn away. He had started doing this 3 weeks ago, leaving his door open, not wide open, never that obvious, but just enough for the gesture to be deniable. It was a question mark hanging in the physical space of our home, an ellipsis at the end of every evening. The first time, I had dismissed it as carelessness. The second, a coincidence. But by the fifth, the seventh, the 10th time, it had become a ritual, a silent invitation I was too terrified to answer and too captivated to ignore. I would stand there, my own bedroom door closed firmly behind me, my hand resting on the cool metal of the knob, and I would just watch that sliver of shadow. I would listen for the sound of his breathing, the soft rustle of sheets, any sign that would give me a clue, a key to unlock the meaning behind the gesture. Was he lonely? Was he cold? Or was he, in some way I barely dared to imagine, asking for me? My heart hammered a frantic, syncopated rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat for the war being waged in my mind between a decade of carefully guarded friendship and the wild, impossible hope that was blooming, thorny and beautiful, in the ruins of my self-control. To understand the weight of that open door, you have to understand the architecture of our friendship, the foundation we had built over 10 years. We met in a crowded university lecture hall, a cavernous space designed for anonymity. I was tucked into a corner in the back, nursing a lukewarm coffee, trying to make myself as small as possible. I was a photography student, an observer by nature and by trade, more comfortable behind a lens than in front of one. My world was a composition of light and shadow, of moments framed and captured, of feelings developed in the quiet solitude of a darkroom. Then Julian slid into the seat beside me, a whirlwind of kinetic energy. He was all bright smiles and easy confidence, a computer science major who also happened to be a star on the university swim team. He smelled faintly of chlorine and something clean and sharp, like fresh laundry. He was a creature of light and motion, everything I was not. "Is this seat taken?" he had asked, though he was already sitting down, his backpack dropping to the floor with a heavy thud. I remember just shaking my head, unable to form a word. I was intimidated by his sheer presence, the way he seemed to take up more space than his body physically occupied. He didn't seem to notice my silence. He just grinned, a flash of white in the dim auditorium, and started talking about the professor, the miserable coffee, the upcoming midterms. He spoke as if we were already friends, as if my quietness was not a barrier, but a comfortable silence he could fill. And for some reason, with him, it was. His energy didn't exhaust me, it warmed me. It was like standing in the sun after a long time in the shade. That day, he borrowed my notes. The next week, he saved me a seat. By the end of the semester, we were inseparable, a strange and unlikely pairing that somehow made perfect sense. He drew me out of my shell, and I, in turn, seemed to ground him, to offer a quiet harbor from his own relentless energy. We moved in together after graduation, a natural and unspoken progression. Our apartment was a collection of mismatched furniture and shared histories. My photographs lined the walls, stark black and white landscapes, intimate portraits of strangers, captured moments of quiet beauty. His domain was the living room, where the massive television and complex web of gaming console cables were a testament to his need for connection and stimulation. We built a life in that space, a rhythm of comfortable coexistence. I would wake to the sound of his alarm, the smell of his coffee brewing. He would come home from his high-stress job at a tech startup and collapse onto the couch, and I would sit with him, not always talking, just sharing the space, letting the silence settle the frantic energy he carried with him from the city. Our friendship was the bedrock of my life, the one constant in a world that often felt transient and uncertain. And, of course, I was in love with him. I had been for years. It was a quiet, hopeless kind of love, a feeling I had packed away and stored in the deepest, most inaccessible corner of my heart. It was a secret I guarded with the fierce desperation of a cornered animal. To tell him would have been to risk everything, to shatter the beautiful, fragile piece of our friendship. It would be like exposing an undeveloped photograph to the light. The image would be instantly and irrevocably destroyed. So I learned to live with the ache. I became an expert in the art of loving from a distance, of translating the overwhelming urge to touch his face into a casual pat on the shoulder, of turning the words, "I love you," into "Did you remember to take out the trash?" I watched him date, watched him fall in love with a woman named Sarah, watched him get his heart broken. Through it all, I was the constant, the steady friend, the safe harbor. I was the one who listened, who offered a shoulder, who never asked for anything in return. It was a role I had accepted, a penance for a love I felt I had no right to feel. My feelings were my own private darkroom, a place I could retreat to, where I could develop the images of him in my mind without ever risking the brilliant, blinding light of reality. The shift began on a Tuesday, just like the one that found me staring at his open door. It was raining, a miserable, persistent drizzle that had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the city into a watercolor painting of gray and smeared neon. Julian came home late, well after midnight. I was in the living room, editing photos on my laptop, the soft glow of the screen the only light in the room. I heard his key in the lock, the heavy sigh he let out as he closed the door behind him. He didn't turn on the lights. He just stood there for a moment, dripping onto the welcome mat, his silhouette a dark, weary shape against the faint glow from the streetlights. He looked hollowed out. The usual vibrant energy that clung to him like an aura was gone, replaced by a profound and unsettling stillness. "Hey," I said softly, my voice feeling too loud in the quiet room. He didn't answer right away. He just walked over to the couch and sank into it, his wet coat still on. He stared at the blank television screen, his eyes unfocused. I waited. Patience was my primary virtue, the one I had cultivated over years of waiting for the right light, the right moment, the right expression. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. "It's over," he said. "Sarah and me. It's over." There was no drama in his voice, just a flat, empty finality. It wasn't a sudden, explosive end, but the quiet, sad conclusion to something that had been fading for a long time. I knew this. I had seen the growing distance between them, the forced smiles, the conversations that never quite connected. I had felt the familiar, selfish pang of hope, followed immediately by the crushing wave of guilt for feeling it. But now, seeing the genuine pain etched on his face, all I felt was a deep, protective ache for him. I closed my laptop and moved to sit on the coffee table in front of him, creating a small island of shared space in the dark room. "I'm so sorry, Jules," I whispered. He just nodded, his gaze still fixed on the dark screen. He didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't push. I just sat with him in the darkness, the only sounds the steady drumming of the rain against the window and the soft, ragged rhythm of his breathing. After a long time, he shivered, a deep, full-body tremor. He was still in his wet coat. I reached out, my hand hovering for a moment before I gently touched his arm. "You're soaked," I said. "You're going to get sick." He looked at my hand on his arm, then up at me. In the dim light, his eyes looked like dark, bottomless pools. He seemed lost. For the first time since I'd known him, Julian, my bright, confident, self-assured Julian, looked utterly and completely lost. And in that moment, something in the foundation of our friendship shifted. He was no longer just my friend. He was something precious I needed to protect. He let me help him out of his coat. He let me lead him to his room. He didn't protest when I pulled back the covers on his bed. He just crawled in, fully clothed, and curled into a ball, his back to me. I stood in his doorway for a long moment, my heart aching for him. I almost reached out to touch his hair, to offer some small physical comfort, but I stopped myself. The boundaries were still there, invisible but solid walls I had built to protect myself, to protect us. I pulled his door almost closed, leaving just a tiny crack, and went back to the living room, where I sat in the dark for hours, listening to the rain and the sound of my best friend's quiet, lonely grief. That night was the catalyst. It was the hairline fracture in the dam of our platonic relationship. His heartbreak didn't make him lean on me with words. Julian had never been good with words, not for the deep things. Instead, he began to lean on me with his physical presence. It started subtly. A few nights after the breakup, we were watching some mindless action movie, a ritual we'd had for years. Usually, we'd sit on opposite ends of the couch, a comfortable distance between us. But that night, he sat closer. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I was hyper-aware of it, of every small shift of his weight, every breath he took. My own body was rigid, a statue of feigned nonchalance. Then, halfway through the movie, he fell asleep. His head lolled to the side, coming to rest, impossibly, on my shoulder. My heart stopped. I swear it just ceased to beat for a full 10 seconds. I sat there, completely frozen, every nerve ending in my body screaming. His hair was soft against my cheek, and I could smell the faint, familiar scent of his shampoo, a mix of sandalwood and something clean I couldn't name. It was intoxicating. It was torture. My first instinct was to move, to gently nudge him awake and restore the safe distance between us. But I couldn't. The sheer, unadulterated pleasure of his closeness was too powerful, a drug I hadn't realized I was so desperate for. He felt so heavy, so solid, so real against me. It was a profound comfort and an exquisite agony. I sat like that for over an hour, until the movie ended and the credits rolled, my arm numb, my neck stiff, my heart a chaotic mess of joy and terror. When I finally had to move, I did it with the painstaking care of a bomb disposal expert, gently lifting his head and laying him back against the cushions. He murmured something in his sleep, but didn't wake. I stood over him for a moment, my hand trembling as I brushed a stray piece of hair from his forehead. It was the first time I had touched him with undisguised tenderness in years, and the contact felt like an electric shock. I fled to my room, my pulse thundering in my ears, and lay awake for hours, replaying the feeling of his weight against me, the ghost of his warmth still lingering on my shoulder. That was the beginning of the ritual. The couch sleeping became a regular occurrence. He would claim he was exhausted from work, that he just couldn't make it to his bed. I never called him on it. I let him pretend, and I pretended with him. We were co-conspirators in a charade of accidental intimacy. I became an expert at sitting perfectly still for hours, at controlling my breathing so I wouldn't disturb him. These evenings became the focal point of my existence. I lived for those stolen moments of closeness, even as they shredded my nerves. My darkroom became my sanctuary more than ever, the one place where I could process the overexposed emotions of my life, trying to find some balance in the chemical wash of my feelings for him. I would stand in the dim red light, watching his face emerge on the photographic paper, a face I knew better than my own, and I would wonder if I was losing my mind. Then, one night, the ritual escalated. He had been particularly quiet all evening, withdrawn and distant. He was staring at his phone, a frown creasing his brow. I knew he had seen a picture of Sarah with someone new. I didn't need to ask. The air in the room was thick with his unspoken pain. When it was time for bed, he stood up, but instead of heading to his room, he just stood in the middle of the living room, looking lost again. I don't think I can sleep, he said, his voice low. My room feels too empty. My heart did a painful little flip. This was new territory. This was a direct admission of need, not something that could be disguised as exhaustion. I held my breath, waiting for what would come next. Could I? He trailed off, looking at the floor. Is it okay if I just crash on your floor? Just for tonight. It's stupid, I know. It's not stupid, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Of course, you don't have to sleep on the floor, though. My bed's big enough. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. It was a reckless, insane offer, a leap into a chasm of ambiguity. The moment hung in the air between us, charged and fragile. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the hesitation, the raw, aching need. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't meet my eyes. He just walked past me and into my bedroom. I followed a few moments later, my legs feeling unsteady. My room was my most private space, a reflection of my inner world. It was neat, ordered, with stacks of photography books and prints pinned to a corkboard. It was a quiet space. He was already under the covers, on the far side of the bed, his back to me. He had left the entire other half of the mattress empty, a vast, unoccupied territory. I turned off the light and slid into my own side, the distance between us feeling both like a canyon and no distance at all. I lay there in the dark, rigid and awake, listening to him breathe. The silence was deafening. It was filled with everything we weren't saying. I could feel the heat of his body across the sheets, a magnetic pull I had to physically resist. I was so close. I was closer than I had ever been to him, and yet we were miles apart, separated by the unspoken rules of our friendship. I wanted to roll over, to wrap myself around him, to tell him that he wasn't alone, that I was there, that I would always be there. But I didn't. I just lay there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, and waited for morning. That night set the new precedent. The couch was abandoned. My room became his sanctuary. He always had a reason. His room was too cold. He thought he heard a noise. He had a nightmare. The excuses became thinner and thinner, until eventually, he didn't bother with them at all. He would just appear at my door, a pillow under his arm, a silent question in his eyes. And I would always let him in. We never spoke of it in the morning. We would wake up, carefully untangling ourselves if we had moved closer in the night, and go about our day as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Our apartment, once a place of easy, platonic comfort, was now charged with a constant, low-grade hum of tension and unspoken desire. And then came the open door. After a week of him sleeping in my bed, he started retreating to his own room at the end of the night, but he would leave his door ajar. It was a step back, yet also a step forward. It was a more subtle invitation, a more nuanced question. He was giving me a choice. He was no longer the one crossing the threshold into my space. He was inviting me to cross the threshold into his. It was a masterful, perhaps unconscious, shifting of the dynamic. The responsibility, the decision, was now mine, and it was destroying me. Which brought me back to this Tuesday night, standing in the hallway, my own personal Rubicon before me. My hand was sweating on my doorknob. My heart was a trapped bird beating against my ribs. I had been standing here for 10 minutes, maybe more. Time had ceased to have meaning. There was only the before and the potential after. I thought about all the years of silence, of carefully maintained distance. I thought about the risk, the catastrophic, world-ending risk of misinterpreting this. If I was wrong, if I walked into that room and he was just a lonely friend who had carelessly left his door open, I would shatter everything. Our friendship would become a minefield of awkwardness and regret. He would pull away, and I would lose him. I would lose the single most important person in my life. But if I was right, and that sliver of darkness was an invitation, a confession, a plea, then turning away would be a betrayal of a different kind. It would be a rejection of a vulnerability he had so carefully, so tentatively, offered me. It would be an act of cowardice I wasn't sure I could live with. I closed my eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and tried to listen to something other than the frantic panic in my own head. I tried to think like a photographer. What was the image in front of me? What was the light telling me? It was telling me that this was the decisive moment. The moment you either press the shutter or lose the shot forever. My hand fell away from my doorknob. I took one step, then another. The floorboards were silent beneath my bare feet. I reached his door, my fingers trembling as I touched the cool, painted wood. I hesitated for one last, heart-stopping second. Then, slowly, quietly, I pushed it open. The room was dark, but my eyes quickly adjusted. Moonlight filtered through a gap in the curtains, casting a pale, silver light across the bed. He was there, lying on his side, facing the door. He wasn't asleep. His eyes were open, and they were watching me. There was no surprise on his face, only a quiet, unnerving stillness. It was as if he had been waiting. The air crackled. The silence in the room was not empty. It was dense, heavy, filled with a decade of unspoken things. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stood in the doorway, my silhouette framed against the dim light of the hall, feeling utterly exposed. He shifted slightly, a barely perceptible movement, pulling back the edge of the duvet on the empty side of the bed. It was the smallest of gestures, but it was an answer. It was the clearest, most unambiguous signal he had ever given me. My breath hitched in my throat. I stepped into the room and gently, silently, pushed the door closed behind me. The click of the latch was deafening, a sound of finality, of a line being crossed from which there was no return. I walked to the bed, my movements feeling slow and dreamlike, and slid under the covers. We lay there for a long time, facing each other in the moonlight, not touching. The space between us was a live wire. I could see every detail of his face, the soft curve of his lips, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the intense, searching look in his eyes. He looked scared. He looked hopeful. He looked just as lost and found as I felt. I had spent so many years observing him from a distance, capturing his likeness on film, but I had never felt like I was truly seeing him until this moment. This was not the confident, easygoing Julian the world knew. This was someone else, someone vulnerable and uncertain, someone who was letting me see the carefully hidden parts of his heart. His hand moved first, inching across the small space of sheet that separated us. His fingers brushed against mine, a touch so light it was barely there. It was a question. I answered by uncurling my own fingers and lacing them with his. His hand was warm and strong, and the simple contact sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated relief through me. It was an anchor in the storm that was raging inside me. We were holding hands. In his bed, in the middle of the night. The domesticity of it was both surreal and so profoundly right it made my chest ache. "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep and something else, something I couldn't name. It was the first word either of us had spoken since I entered the room. "I'm here," I whispered back. It was all I could manage. It was everything I needed to say. He squeezed my hand. His eyes searched mine in the darkness, and I saw a universe of confusion and longing there. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, terrified of the fall, but desperate to know what it felt like to fly. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I would catch him, that we could fall together. But the words were stuck, trapped behind the same fear I saw in his eyes. What if this was just about comfort? What if he was just using me as a placeholder for the warmth he had lost? The doubt was a cold poison, seeping into the warmth of the moment. My own insecurities were a chorus of whispers, telling me I wasn't enough, that this was a mistake, that I was just a convenience. But then he moved again. He shifted closer, closing the last few inches between us. His knee brushed against mine. His face was so close now I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and soft. He smelled like sleep and clean cotton. My entire being was focused on the infinitesimal space between our lips. It was a space charged with years of pent-up longing, with the silent weight of my secret love. It was the most terrifying, most beautiful space I had ever inhabited. "Would it be?" he started, his voice barely audible, a fragile thread of sound in the stillness. He swallowed, and I saw his throat move in the moonlight. "Would it be okay if I—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The question hung between us, shimmering and delicate. It was a question that held the fate of our entire world in its balance. He was giving me the power. He was making sure I was a willing participant, not just a passive recipient of his own confused needs. It was an act of profound respect, of profound kindness, and it shattered the last of my doubts. This wasn't about him using me. This was about him seeing me. I didn't answer with words. I answered by lifting my free hand, the one that wasn't clutching his as if it were a lifeline, and gently, tentatively, cupping his jaw. His skin was warm, the stubble a soft abrasion against my palm. He leaned into my touch, his eyes fluttering closed for a brief second. A silent surrender. And in that moment, all the fear, all the anxiety, all the years of waiting just evaporated. There was no more analysis, no more overthinking. There was only this moment, this man, this feeling of rightness that settled deep in my bones. I closed the final millimeter of space between us and kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion or desperate hunger. It was a kiss of discovery. It was soft, hesitant, a question and an answer all at once. His lips were softer than I had ever imagined. For a moment, we were both still, just feeling the simple, impossible pressure of mouth against mouth. Then he sighed, a soft sound of release, and kissed me back. His other hand came up to rest on my hip, his touch gentle, grounding. The kiss deepened slightly, but it never lost its tentative, exploratory quality. It was a conversation without words, a mapping of new territory. We were learning the shape of each other, the taste of each other, the feel of this new, terrifying, wonderful thing we were creating between us and the dark. It was the most honest, most vulnerable moment of my entire life. It tasted like hope. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We didn't move away. Our foreheads rested together, our hands still clasped between us. His thumb stroked the back of my hand in a slow, steady rhythm. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was no longer fraught with tension and unspoken questions. It was a comfortable, peaceful silence, the kind of silence that only exists between two people who have just shared something true. "Okay," he whispered into the space between us. "Okay," I whispered back, a smile touching my lips for the first time. He pulled me closer then, and I went willingly, my head finding the natural hollow of his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me securely, and I buried my face in his chest, inhaling his scent, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart against my ear. It was the safest I had ever felt. It was home. I had spent a decade loving him in secret, and now, impossibly, I was in his arms, and it felt more real than anything I had ever known. We didn't say another word. We didn't need to. We just held each other, and in the quiet, moonlit darkness of his room, we fell asleep. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering into the room. For a blissful, disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. I just knew I was warm and safe and not alone. Then memory came rushing back, and my eyes snapped open. I was still in Julian's arms. His hold on me had loosened in sleep, but he was still there, his body a solid, comforting weight against mine. His breathing was deep and even. I lay there for a long time, not daring to move, trying to commit every single detail of the moment to memory. The way the light caught the edge of his jaw, the soft texture of his t-shirt under my cheek, the feeling of his heartbeat, slow and steady, a rhythm that seemed to sync with my own. It was perfect. It was a photograph I wanted to live in forever. But the morning light brought with it the cold tendrils of reality. What did this mean? What were we now? The night had been a dreamlike bubble of intimacy, but the day was coming, with all its harsh light and complicated truths. My old friend, anxiety, began to stir in the pit of my stomach. Last night felt real, but what if, in the light of day, he regretted it? What if it was a moment of lonely, post-breakup madness he would now wish he could take back? The fear was a physical thing, a cold knot tightening in my chest. I needed to know, but I was terrified to find out. I must have tensed, because Julian stirred behind me. He made a soft, sleepy sound, and his arm tightened around my waist, pulling me closer against him. It was an instinctive, unconscious gesture, and it did more to soothe my rising panic than any words could have. He was still holding on to me. That had to mean something. I allowed myself to relax back into his hold, to savor the feeling for a few more precious moments. Eventually, though, the need for the bathroom became undeniable. With painstaking slowness, I began to untangle myself from his limbs. I managed to slide out of the bed without waking him. I stood for a moment, looking down at his sleeping face. He looked so young, so peaceful. The fierce love I felt for him was so overwhelming it almost buckled my knees. I crept out of the room, closing the door softly behind me, and retreated to the safety of my own space. I showered, the hot water doing little to calm my racing mind. I dressed. I made coffee, the familiar morning ritual, a small anchor in a sea of uncertainty. I kept listening for sounds from his room, for the creak of the floorboards, the click of his door. But there was only silence. An hour passed, then another. By 9 o'clock, a deep, unsettling quiet had settled over the apartment. He was usually up by 7, even on weekends. The silence began to feel less like peaceful sleep and more like avoidance. The knot of anxiety in my stomach returned, tighter than ever. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked to his door and knocked softly. "Jules? You awake?" Silence. I knocked again, a little louder. "Juliet." I heard a muffled sound from inside, a rustling of sheets. Then his voice, thick with sleep and something else I couldn't identify. "Yeah, I'm up." His voice was flat, devoid of any of the warmth from the night before. My heart sank. "I made coffee," I offered, trying to keep my own voice light. "Thanks. I'll be out in a minute." But he wasn't. A minute turned into 10, then 20. I sat at our small kitchen table, nursing my cold coffee, my gaze fixed on his closed bedroom door. It felt like a fortress now, the opposite of what it had been last night. The open invitation had become a barrier. I felt sick. I had been wrong. I had misread everything. I had taken his grief and loneliness and twisted it into something it wasn't, because I was desperate to believe it was real. I had ruined everything. Our friendship, our home, the beautiful, easy comfort we had shared for a decade. All of it, gone, because I had been selfish enough to push open that door. When he finally emerged, he wouldn't look at me. He was dressed in sweats and a hoodie, his hair a mess. He walked straight to the coffee pot, his shoulders hunched, and poured himself a mug. The silence was excruciating. I could feel the chasm that had opened up between us, a vast, empty space where just hours before there had been an impossible, breathtaking intimacy. "So," I started, my voice sounding strained and unnatural. "About last night." He flinched, a small, barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders. "I'm late for work," he muttered, cutting me off. He wasn't. It was Saturday. He grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door, still not looking at me. "I gotta go." "Julian, wait," I pleaded, standing up. "We need to talk about this." He finally turned to look at me, and what I saw in his eyes broke my heart. It was pure, undiluted panic. He looked like a cornered animal. "I can't, Leo," he said, his voice low and strained. "Not right now. I can't." And then he was gone. The front door clicked shut behind him, and I was left standing in the middle of our silent apartment, the smell of his coffee hanging in the air like a ghost. The silence he left behind was a crushing weight. It was the loudest, most painful silence I had ever experienced. I sank back into my chair, the cold, bitter reality of the morning washing over me. I had crossed a line, and in doing so, I had not found a new beginning, but a devastating end. I had lost him. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Julian avoided the apartment like it was contaminated. He would leave before I woke up and come home long after I had gone to bed. When our paths did cross, in a brief, awkward encounter in the hallway or kitchen, he would offer a tight, forced smile and a mumbled greeting before disappearing into his room and closing the door. The closed door was a statement, a clear and painful reversal of his previous invitations. It was a wall, and I was on the wrong side of it. I tried to give him space. I told myself he was confused, that he was processing, that he just needed time. But with each passing day of silence, the hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest began to wither and die. I was left with the ashes of my own foolish optimism. I retreated into myself, into my work. I spent hours in the darkroom, the smell of chemicals a familiar, acrid comfort. I tried to lose myself in the process, in the magic of bringing an image to life. But every face I saw on the paper morphed into his. Every landscape felt empty. My art, my refuge, offered no escape. It only reflected my own heartbreak back at me. I felt a growing anger simmering beneath the surface of my grief. It was an anger born of frustration and hurt. He was the one who had started this. He had left the door open. He had pulled back the covers. He had asked the question. He had initiated everything, drawing me out of my carefully constructed shell, only to slam the door in my face the moment I showed my true self. It was cruel. It was cowardly. And I couldn't let it end like this, in a fog of unspoken resentment and misunderstanding. Our friendship, our 10 years of history, deserved more than a silent, awkward death. He owed me an explanation. I owed it to myself to demand one. A week after the kiss, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I knew he was planning on coming home early that evening. He'd left a note on the counter about a package being delivered. I waited for him. I sat on the couch, the same couch where this whole agonizing ritual had begun, and I waited. My heart was pounding, a mixture of dread and determination churning in my stomach. This was it. I was going to force a confrontation. Whatever the outcome, it would be better than this suffocating silence. I heard his key in the lock, and I braced myself. He walked in, saw me sitting there, and immediately tensed. His escape route was cut off. He couldn't pretend he didn't see me. He couldn't just retreat to his room. He was trapped. "Hey," he said, his voice wary. He dropped his bag by the door, not moving any further into the room. "We need to talk," I said, my own voice coming out stronger and clearer than I expected. "Now, Julian." "No more running away," he sighed, a long, weary sound, and ran a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes. This silence had clearly been taking a toll on him, too. He finally walked over and sank into the armchair opposite the couch, putting as much distance between us as the furniture would allow. He stared at his hands, which were clasped tightly in his lap. "What do you want me to say, Leo?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I want you to tell me the truth," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my resolve. "What was that night about? Was any of it real? Or was I just a convenient body in a lonely bed? Because if that's all it was, you need to tell me. I can take it. What I can't take is this. This silence. This pretending like I don't exist. You are breaking my heart, Julian. And if you're going to do it, at least have the decency to do it to my face." The words hung in the air, raw and painful. I had laid myself bare, my vulnerability a weapon and a shield. I watched a storm of emotions cross his face. Guilt, fear, and something else, something that looked like a deep, profound sadness. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were glistening. It wasn't like that," he said, his voice cracking. "God, Leo, no. You could never be just convenient." He shook his head, looking away again. "I'm so sorry. I've been such a coward. I freaked out. Freaked out about what?" I pressed, my voice softer now. "About kissing me? Or about liking it?" He flinched at the directness of the question. He was quiet for a long time, and I thought he might not answer. I thought he might just get up and walk away again. But he didn't. He took a deep, shuddering breath and finally, started to talk. "Both," he admitted, his voice so quiet I had to strain to hear him. "Everything. Leo, you have to understand my whole life has been a straight line. School, swimming, degree, job, girlfriend. It was all laid out. It was simple. I knew who I was supposed to be. And then Sarah and I ended, and the line just disappeared. I was completely lost. And you were the only thing that felt solid. The only thing that made sense." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. "Being with you, in your room, it was the only time I felt quiet. My head is always so loud, you know? Always running, always worrying. But when I'm with you, it just stops. And that night was the quietest it has ever been. It felt right. It felt more right than anything has in a very long time. And that's what scared the hell out of me." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Because what does that mean? I've never felt that way about a guy before. I've never thought about it. It's not part of the plan. It's not on the map. And kissing you, it wasn't just a kiss. It felt like, I don't know, it felt like coming home. And I have no idea what to do with that feeling. It terrifies me, because it means everything I thought I knew about myself might be wrong. And it terrifies me because you're my best friend. You're the most important person in my life. What if I mess this up? What if I ruin the one good, solid thing I have left?" I couldn't live with that. So I ran. It was easier to run than to face it, His confession washed over me, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified of his own feelings for me. All the anger I had been holding on to just dissolved, replaced by a deep, aching empathy. He was just as scared as I had been. We were both just standing on the edge of that same cliff, paralyzed by the fear of the fall. I saw it all so clearly now. His retreat wasn't a rejection of me, but a panicked reaction to the magnitude of what he was feeling. I got up from the couch and crossed the space between us. I knelt on the floor in front of his chair, so we were at eye level. He watched me, his expression wary, vulnerable. I reached out and gently took his hands in mine. They were cold. "You think you're the only one who's scared," I said softly. "Julian, I have been in love with you for the better part of a decade. I have been terrified of you finding out every single day of that decade, because I was so sure it would ruin this, that it would ruin us. The thought of losing you as my friend is the most terrifying thing I can possibly imagine." His eyes widened, shock and something else, wonder, dawning on his face. "A decade," he whispered. I nodded, a small, sad smile on my lips. "You are a little slow on the uptake." The gentle, dry humor was a risk, but it landed. A tiny, watery smile touched his lips. "So when you walked into my room that night," I continued, my voice growing stronger with the truth, "that wasn't just a kiss for me. That was everything. And when you disappeared the next morning, you didn't just leave me confused. You made me believe that my everything was your nothing, that it was a mistake. You took the most honest moment of my life and made me feel ashamed of it." A tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. "Leo, I am so sorry. I never wanted to make you feel that way. I was just so lost in my own panic. I didn't even think about how it would feel for you." "That's unforgivable." "It's not," I said immediately, squeezing his hands. "It's not unforgivable. It's just human. We're both scared. We're both standing at the edge of something new and big, and we have no idea what we're doing. But the one thing I know, the one thing I am not scared of, is you. And I don't want to do this without you. I don't want to go back to the way things were, pretending. But I can't do this silence, either. So you have to choose, Jules. You can keep running, and I will have to find a way to let you go. Or you can stay. You can stay here, with me, and we can be scared together." I had laid all my cards on the table. There was nothing left to hide behind. The choice was his. The silence that followed was different from the one that had haunted our apartment all week. This was a silence of consideration, of a monumental decision being weighed. He looked down at our joined hands, then back up at my face. He searched my eyes, and I let him see everything. My fear, my hope, my unwavering love for him. I didn't look away. I held his gaze, my heart in my throat. Slowly he nodded. It was a small movement, but it was decisive. "I want to stay," he said, his voice clear and certain for the first time. "I don't want to run anymore. I want to be scared with you." The relief was so absolute it felt like I could finally breathe again after being underwater for a week. I let out a shaky laugh, and a few tears of my own decided to make an appearance. He used his thumb to gently wipe one from my cheek, his touch as tentative and full of wonder as it had been on the night of the kiss. We didn't kiss again, not then. It wasn't what the moment needed. What we needed was to rebuild, to find our footing on this new ground. We just stayed there for a long time, kneeling on the floor of our living room, holding hands, and talking. We talked for hours. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked about his fears and my hopes, about the past 10 years and the terrifying, exciting possibility of the next 10. It was clumsy and awkward and beautiful. We were two people learning a new language together, stumbling over the grammar, but understanding the meaning perfectly. That night, when it was time for bed, there was a moment of awkward hesitation at our bedroom doors. The old ritual was gone, and we hadn't yet created a new one. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. I just smiled, took his hand, and led him into my room. And this time, when I closed the door, it wasn't to shut the world out. It was to let him in. We lay down in my bed, face to face, and for the first time, it felt completely, unequivocally natural. There was no pretense, no plausible deniability. Just us. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "It's more than okay," I said, and I leaned in and kissed him, a simple, sweet kiss of reassurance. "It's everything." The following weeks were a process of gentle discovery. We were mapping the new landscape of our relationship, one hesitant touch, one shared smile at a time. The crushing tension that had filled our apartment was replaced by a quiet, joyful intimacy. We found our new rituals. Morning coffee was no longer a solitary, uncertain affair, but something we did together, our hands brushing as we reached for the same cupboard. Movie nights on the couch now involved a comfortable tangle of limbs, my head on his chest, his arms securely around me. The fear didn't vanish overnight, for either of us. There were still moments of hesitation, of uncertainty, flickers of the old panic in his eyes, or the old insecurity in mine. But now we could talk about it. We learned to navigate the fear together, to reassure each other with a quiet word or a simple touch. His world had been loud, and mine had been guarded. But together, we were creating a space of profound, healing quiet. He was the one who made my world quiet, not by silencing it, but by filling it with a peace so complete that the noise no longer mattered. One Saturday morning, a month or so later, I woke up wrapped in his arms. The sun was streaming through the window, and the apartment was filled with the smell of brewing coffee. He was already awake, watching me, a soft, easy smile on his face. It was a look of such pure, uncomplicated affection that it stole my breath. It was the kind of look I had dreamed of for years, a look I had only ever captured from a distance with my camera. Now, it was here, it was real, and it was for me. "Morning," he murmured, his voice husky with sleep. He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, lazy morning kiss that was infinitely more intimate than any passionate embrace. "Morning," I smiled back. "You made coffee." "I did," he said. "I was thinking we could just stay here all day, in this bed, and maybe tomorrow, too." I laughed, a sound of pure contentment. "I think I can be convinced." I looked at him, truly looked at him. This man who had been my friend, my secret love, my source of heartache, and was now, impossibly, my partner. The journey had been terrifying, a walk through a dark and uncertain landscape. But we had found our way through it. We had pushed open the door, faced the fear on the other side, and found not a catastrophe, but a home. We had learned that the quietest moments are often the most profound, and that the bravest thing you can ever do is allow yourself to be truly seen by another person. We had begun to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that this was just the beginning. The photograph was still developing, and its future was bright.